Good morning, everyone. I'm Lori Lowell, the Executive Director of Home Haven, and this is a Home Haven presentation with Harriet Bergman talking about Uncle Tom's Cabin. And for those of you who are going on the field trip at the end of June, this will be a wonderful way to introduce you to the book and to the work of Harriet Beecher Stowe. Now, just a moment about Harriet Bergman. Harriet Bergman is a founding member of Home Haven and a member of East Rock Village. She runs our 4 memoir groups, which are very popular. And we've been informed that there's actually an opening for 2 people. So please get in touch with Harriet if you're interested in memoir. And then just a brief statement that Harriet you're an adjunct writing
I'm a
professor.
lecturer.
She's a lecturer in writing, I believe, at Yale. And so she's did you say an English major also? So she was an English major. She's well qualified to lead this conversation. So Harriet, go ahead. And if there's anything more we need to know about you, please share. Thank you.
I see that everybody is muted, and if you have a question, and I want conversation, I'm not giving a lecture here. So if you put your hand up like that and then unmute yourself, I can call on you, or Lori can call on you, or any of the above. Okay, but this is participatory. Okay. Have you, I understand a book group was reading it. Have you all read this? Put up your hand if you've read it recently. Oh, some people haven't. Okay, good. All right, that's interesting. Did you like it? Yeah. Did you unmute yourselves and chip in and just put your did you find it difficult / interesting, cultural? What was it to you? Cindy?
I loved it. I mean, I hadn't read it and I had no idea what to expect. And she's just a wonderful writer. I found it very Dickensian. There were unforgettable characters. There were sentimental heroines and villains and coincidences, and then the whole social justice part. Dickens was fighting for many things against child labor, etc. I mean, it was, it held my attention. I was delighted. I thought it might be, a historical slog, but it was a wonderful read.
Oh, wonderful. Good. That's all very, very good. It was enormously popular. It sold $500,000 in the 500,000 books in the first month. I mean, she thought she was going to go in. She wrote a lot before this. Her first publication was, I have to find my whole list of things here. 1833. And she thought that she was going to publish her, supplement her husband's income. He was a minister, and she would, supplement his income by writing for the magazines and the newspapers, which she did a lot. She wrote half of the time for the National Era, which was a liberation magazine, and she wrote for the Liberator, which was another one. And she wrote for the Christian Evangelists and a whole bunch of religious periodicals as well. But it wasn't like she came to this book and I want to show you. We went through our library, and we have a couple of really old and damaged. I don't think they're worth anything, but there's an illustration, and this says that this is volume 2. It is the 70th thousand, and this is just 1852. So this woman was publishing a storm. It became just instantly popular, translated into French 3 months later. It was just an amazing thing. And well, the things that Cindy says are right.
Okay.
Got good characters. It's exciting. It's got lots of tragedy and pretty much hope. Did anybody read it in as in high school or in grammar school? Terry, you did? That's interesting because it's a hard to take book, I think, and I don't know if I would teach it to kids now. But it's very interesting. What I want to do is not, I mean, we can do this toward the end, but I don't want to talk about it as literature so much as I want to talk about reception and the ways in which it became part of our popular culture, really. I have a bunch of things to share with you. Let me, I lost myself. No, I didn't. I'm sorry. I hate it when this happens to people, and here I am doing it. The first thing that I've got on here is quite interesting, I think. Are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
You are? Okay. LHUS.
Wait a minute,
you.
we're not seeing your
We're not
screen.
seeing we're only seeing your face.
Seeing my face. Okay, that's wrong. Right, okay. So I will go back and share screen. Now you can see.
Now we see your screen.
Okay, this is a quote from the Literary History of the United States, which is a big, very important book, 2-volume book for people like me, you know, when I was a graduate student and stuff like that. And George Witcher, who was a pretty famous scholar, nothing attributable to Mrs. Stowe or her handiwork can account for the novel's enormous vogue. Its author's resources as a purveyor of Sunday school fiction were not remarkable. She had at most a ready command of broadly conceived melodrama. When she went abroad, the reception accorded her was little short of hysterical. And that's the most left-handed compliment I think I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Isn't it amazing? This is 1966. This wasn't contemporary of hers. And the word handiwork, well, that's what women do, right? An enormous vogue. And and of course, the word hysterical, that's what women have, is hysterics. And melodrama. She had at most a ready command of melodrama. Now, nobody ever accused Dickens of these kinds of things. And he was popular. He was as popular, but she has sold and still continues to have sold more than the Bible. Some years she was only second to the Bible in sales, but this is not nothing.
Are you talking about this book?
I'm talking
Sold
about
more than the Bible? This one book sold more than the Bible?
Uncle Tom's Cabin. Yes,
Sold more than the Bible.
yes.
Okay.
At least in the year that it came out. I have the note someplace, but it's the vogue of it is just incredible how popular it was. And it must have been in part, at least, due to the fact that people were ready for it. And they went ahead and read it. And it's really quite an amazing thing. So I want to talk to you a little bit at first about the contemporary reception, because within 2 years after it came out, within 1 year, it was translated onto the stage. There were songs, there was art, and I want you to see a couple of those kinds of things. Here is an ad for Topsy Tobacco. Can you see? You're seeing this, right? Now Topsy is wicked, right? I so wicked. So tobacco is not what you really should have. So this is Topsy Tobacco. And then here's Topsy in an ad for Coats Black Thread. The color won't come off by wetting. So that's, and there's Topsy. And she's saying the color won't hurt her, and she's like Coats Black Thread. Now, into our own time, here is Aunt Jemima, right? With her headscarf on, and we had Aunt Jemima pancakes, right? I mean, that's not a new thing to us. And then it gets translated into, you recognize this? Gone with the Wind, right?
Yeah, Gone with the Wind.
And Mammy, and the concern, and that same exact face that's portrayed is really, very, very interesting stuff. So so as a contemporary item for Stowe, man, it did everything. I've got a lot of pictures, and I don't think I'll show all of them, but minstrel shows had actually, to some extent, started before this, but all kinds of shows, and Uncle Tom, and they would convert Uncle Tom himself as character into positive, negative, all kinds of things. Sometimes they didn't obviously rely on the evil of the novel and the bad things that it shows, but they certainly made coin of it. They just used it. And another thing I want to show you is a very interesting, this was a contemporary of Stowe's. This came out two years after Uncle Tom's Cabin. It's called Uncle Tom's Cabin in Ruins. And I think Brimblecombe must be a fake name, but I don't know that they've ever identified Brimblecombe. It was published in Boston, which is kind of interesting.
Harriet, we're not seeing your screen anymore.
I'm sorry.
You closed it when you
I did, and I forgot to share again. Okay, this is Uncle Tom's Cabin in Ruins, and this is written as a series of letters addressed to Stowe. And as I say, I don't think anybody knows who did this at all. So, and you're seeing this now, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And what year is this?
This is 53, I think.
Okay.
And he's addressing her. One of the characters first appearing in your book is Mr. Haley. Now, you all remember Mr. Haley, who is, so far as a candid man is able to judge, a respectable and skillful merchant in slaves. And this goes on, are you not aware that the Constitution of these United States recognizes these animals as property? My feeling about this, and I think at least one other scholar agrees, that this is all satire. He says at the end, these laws, therefore being correct, the merchant of slaves is engaged in a profession as fair, respectable, and honorable as any business whatsoever that is transacted in society. So one of the things that I've been thinking about is this book as criticism of capitalism. Does that seem like something that agrees with your view of it? You could talk. I like talk. if anybody wants to respond. It
Harriet,
does, yeah,
Okay,
yeah, hi,
yeah.
Ken.
we just read it in book group,
Uh-huh,
and I had read it as a child because up in New Hampshire, it's on the
Wow.
children's edition is on our shelf. So,
uh-huh.
and so having seen illustrations like this, it never occurred to me that capitalism was part of it. Even this week, when I reread the whole thing, it is such a religious text,
Yes,
and the historical significance really hit me
yeah.
of,
Her,
uh,
her, yeah,
its place in the middle of the 19th century vis-a-vis slavery and vis-a-vis Christianity. I
right.
wonder, how do you see capitalism in there, except for the
Well,
slave and Mr. Healy, and
Uh,
the whole concept of slavery.
the whole concept is money. You get a slave the way that we might buy a lawnmower.
Sure.
You buy a slave and you use the slave, and you don't say to yourself, wait, this is a person. You you know, that is what is happening. So there are obviously a lot of other themes in it, but it's just recently the whole idea of it being. And I'm sure she didn't have this in her mind necessarily, but it turns out to be an indictment of capitalism, because that's the justification for everything that's going on is, well, I own that. I've got to use that. Now, Simon Legree obviously goes over in some other direction, and that's quite different. But it seems to me that that notion is in there.
In
Well,
this, in her abolitionist sense of freedom and liberty,
Yeah.
and the whole, the underpinnings of the Civil War, of course, were the most economic I can think of. But,
Right. Right.
yeah.
So I think it's there. Cindy, what were you going to say?
Oh, yeah, I agree with Harriet. I mean, Stowe talks a lot about the system. She's kind of careful not to blame individuals too much. I read somewhere she's actually kind of trying to bring Northerners and Southerners together. I mean, she criticizes both, and she also makes excuses for both. And the whole thing I think that underpins this system is profit. I mean, you need slaves to work your land. You need, it's all about buying and selling. People will do very bad things for money.
Especially when you're talking about a plantation. I mean, this is a lot of.
And I think
So-
in the North had an advantage in that they didn't grow cotton. I mean, they didn't need
Right.
huge numbers of laborers the way they did in the South. And even Mr. Shelby, who's basically a decent person, but gets into debt and,
Right,
feels like he
right.
has to do this bad thing. And so.
And that is the fault of the system in that.
Right.
It's not the fault of Shelby himself. So
Start a screen share.
Whoops, sorry.
your little guy is talking. But one of the other things that happens, I'm sorry, is the Fugitive Slave Law, which is 1850. Can you see that pretty clearly? And the Fugitive Slave Law could have been one of the things that really sparked her to write this, because it implicates the entire country. It implicates the North as much as the South. No person shall be discharged from service or labor, which is slavery, but shall be delivered up on claim of the party to whom such service or labor may be due. And that's the owner of the slave, right? So this meant that if you were happily living in Boston or in Hartford, you couldn't say, that's a terrible thing they do down there, because now you were doing it too. So other things you want to say about that? That, I think, was really one of the central things that motivated her. And then, of course, what we have after the terrible war is the wonderful simplicity of the 13th Amendment. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment, and of course this means in jail, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Congress shall have power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. So that's it. You don't go anywhere. And here's what Boston responded. Colored people of Boston, one and all, you are hereby respectfully cautioned and advised to avoid conversing with the watchmen and police officers of Boston, for since the recent order of the mayor and aldermen, they are empowered to act as kidnappers and slave catchers. Keep a sharp lookout, kidnappers, and have top eye open. So you're complicit, even if you live in Boston. You're doing this really bad thing. I think those are all the things I want to show you right now. So in cultural terms, in societal terms of both her society and in a way ours, given George Witcher's statement, it's to be put down and to be held up. When integration fully came about, and I don't think I'm going to play this for you, but The King and I, you know, the musical, is 1955. So schools were fully integrated in that year. And if you remember, the slaves of the King of Siam put on a little show. You remember this? And they sing a song about Topsy. And they sing about, they call it the small house of Uncle Thomas. And they talk about Eliza running across the ice. Eliza, come to the river, Tuptim says. Poor Eliza, the chorus sings. Who can save her? Only Buddha. Buddha, Buddha, Buddha. Save her, Buddha. Buddha, make a miracle. Buddha, send an angel down. Angel, make the wind blow cold. Make the river water hard, hard enough to walk upon. And then the chorus says, Buddha, make a miracle. Angel, show her how to walk on frozen water. Now, as token of his love, Buddha, make no miracle. Eliza crosses the river. Buddha calls out the sun and melts the ice. And she runs from Simon Legree. You know, they've got it a little cockeyed. But the point is that this becomes something that, you know, works its way into our memories too. He's a real Simon Legree. I think I've probably said that in my life. But here, Rodgers and Hammerstein sticking it into The King and I. And I think it's wonderful. And if you remember, at some point, I think Deborah Carr says, slaves, slaves, all of your people are slaves to the King of Siam. And I can't remember how he reacts, but I think that's probably familiar to you. So it comes into all manner of times of culture, of changes. And I guess let's talk maybe first about, well, some of the themes. Okay, the title that Stowe first came up with was The Man Who Was a Thing. Isn't that fabulous? I mean, it's just right on, and that's essentially what it's about. So Christianity, talk about what is in there as that Christianity does or says. And maybe there are a lot of people who haven't read it recently. Is that true?
Haven't read it.
Also,
Okay.
audio now on.
Okay.
Harriet, I would think in terms of certain characters, especially the women,
Yeah.
to me, portrayed her abolitionist Christian values. What do you think, Cindy?
Oh, yeah, the the wives are often trying to, get their husbands to be more kind and
Mhm.
Christian.
And there's an assumption, I guess, on her part. Well, except for Marie, you remember Marie, very, very bad, very nasty, very self-centered. But we know that Marie is bad because she's not a good mother. And it's those mother-child relationships that, you know, divide the good people from the bad people. And Stowe, in her addresses to the reader, and again, if you haven't read it recently, you might
Diane
not
Director,
remember
just
this,
joined the meeting.
but she talks quite a bit. She addresses the reader
Upgrade off.
like, oh, mother of children, if this happened to you, what would you do? Essentially, is her question, and that's one of the central motivations of the abolitionists. I think that tearing a child out of its mother's arms is just about the worst. And if you remember, Toni Morrison's take on this in Beloved is death. That's a little bit preferable to life, to the life of a slave.
Well,
And
there's that woman on the boat who throws her, she finds out her child has been sold and she
Right.
throws herself off the boat and kills
Right.
herself.
right. It's for Stowe especially, and the other thing, the other biographical thing is that she had just had a child die a year before this, and it really, really wrenched her terribly. He was 19 months, I think, something like that, and died of cholera. And that was as bad as it could be, is for a mother to lose a child. That was the thing that she thought was absolutely the worst. Um, but of course, and somewhat linked to that, but maybe a little bit separate too, is the whole theme of Christianity and what the Bible tells you. And who is the one person who clings to what the Bible tells them? Tom, right? Um, and it's I mean, Tom not only turns the other cheek, but it's way more than that. It's that kind of super Christian and Jesus forgiveness that Tom is able to demonstrate. And that's what she's after. Remember, this is a daughter of and a wife of ministers. And for her, it's a natural thing, but she wants people to understand that they can't just claim to be Christians if they're going to allow this other thing to happen. So if you excuse it as a kind of capitalism and you think you can be a Christian that way, no. She says, no, no way. I'm looking at some notes. There was No, I don't have it here. Another whole aspect to this that Stowe really doesn't want to deal with very much. She does obliquely, which is Black women being sold to white men for only one purpose, a very bad one. And she implies it, and she implies that that's what is happening to Cassie at some point. But there was another woman, let me find all my notes here, who had written about this as an issue, as a problem, and published it. And I'm right now blanking on her name. Lydia Maria Child edited her book. I had it here a minute ago. No. And she was, Hans, are you on? Remind me.
Harriet Jacobs.
Harriet Jacobs, right. All the good people are named Harriet. And Harriet Jacobs wrote with the help of a woman named Lydia Maria Child, who was a much published author in the 19th century, a book about her experiences, which was much not graphic at all, but more literal, and of course not fit for a nice white woman's ears. But this was the truth, and we know that it was the truth. I suppose the other thing that needs to be said is the emphasis at the end of the book on slaves going back to Africa. Liberia is the place that they should be going back to. It's that's where they came from. That's where they should go back to. But she doesn't insist on that terribly much. I don't think she doesn't think that that's the only thing that should happen. She doesn't present it as absolutely the cure to this, because I think she understands that it's not going to happen, that it's not, it wouldn't be an easy thing to accomplish. And so that's not what she's doing. And of course, you know that famous quote, maybe the most famous thing about Harriet Beecher Stowe, which seems, some people think something like this might have happened. Some people think it's totally apocryphal, but that she went to the White House to meet Lincoln, and he said, "So this is the little woman who started this great war." He might have, I don't know.
He had a good, he might have been joking. He had a good sense of humor.
Yeah, he might have, but
the
it's not really
introduction,
funny.
the introduction to one version I read scoffed at that idea and said it was really, the right book at the right time. And it was the Fugitive Slave Law and the fact that it came out when it did that helped make it hugely popular. I mean, slavery and anti-slavery were already burning issues. I mean, she didn't start the dialogue.
Right. But there's some sense in which, when he's presented with her and this book that is so astoundingly popular, it's not a bad thing to say either. It certainly could be right to a whole large extent.
Well, she made the characters so sympathetic. I mean, she really, tugged at the heartstrings, and, hopefully feeling people were very moved.
Yeah. Okay.
Harriet, question apropos of the popularity. Did I read that it was serialized first?
Yes,
So
it was
so that people had their appetite whetted over a period of time through magazine articles, right?
Right, very much so. And you know that serialized books were very popular then. When a Dickens novel would come over, people would gang up at the boat, at the docks, to grab the next chapter. So it was certainly something that happened quite a bit. And it was serialized first, but she succeeded with it. There's no doubt. So let me see what else I can tell you about that aspect of it. And so I want to hear a little bit more about your set of assumptions about it. If you haven't reread it recently, what sticks in your mind? If you've read it ever, if you haven't read it, go read it. But what sticks, what do you say to yourself is, that's what Uncle Tom's Cabin is? There were also, in terms of popularity, something like 8 silent movies made of it, which is interesting because you don't get in a silent movie any of the complexity of language that would make the novel complex. It's very simple. This happens and this happens, and you show it. And as far as I can tell, there's only one of them that is at least partially recovered. The rest of them aren't even on YouTube. Um, but they didn't show, didn't make graphic any of the really terrible scenes, and didn't whitewash it up in other ways. So it was still popular in the 19th century. And according to one source, and I'm not sure whether this is accurate, and I don't think anybody's really investigated it, 1919 was the first time that Uncle Tom was used in a derogatory way, which is interesting. Nowadays, if you think about it, people call people Uncle Tom. He's a real Uncle Tom. Well, that means that you were willing to be subservient. It means that you care more about what white people think than about what Black people think. So it's got a lot of interesting connotations, but think of how it flips. It's just completely the other thing because it's now, an insult, a complete insult. Isn't that sort of interesting? I mean, I hadn't thought about it until somebody pointed it out. But I think it's an interesting thing to notice again culturally. Yeah.
Harry, is that phrase, the phrase, he's a real Uncle Tom, is that a phrase that Black people use to describe other Blacks? Or is it a phrase that white people would
No,
use?
I think
Black
both to some extent, but I think it's more Black people about Black people. It's an insult. It's a way of saying you're not up to date. You're not modern. You aren't with it. You're old times. That's the way it used to be, and it's very, very negative. Cindy.
Yeah, that just bothers me so much because Uncle Tom is the character with the most moral courage and personal integrity in the whole book. I mean, he won't even lie when he knows that the women have escaped from Simon Legree. He won't even say, I don't know where they went. He says, I know, but I can't tell you. And he gets, whipped, and
Right.
he refuses to whip the other slaves when his master wants him to. And and he's like, you could kill me, but you can't control my mind, and I won't do it. So to me, he's just
You're exactly
outstanding. And I just think it's he's not a weakling that just gives in to whatever you want me to do, I'll do it because I'm just a underling. I mean, he's the opposite.
He's the opposite, again, always in the name of Christianity. And the most Christian thing you can do is to forgive somebody who is doing bad things to you. And that's what he's able to do. And because of that, I don't know, it has a lot of connotations, but I bet that not all that many people who call other people Uncle Toms have read the novel either. So
Or do you think it depends what you think of Christianity too, how you look at it? Because I don't know, if you're a Black revolutionary, you're not going to think much of Uncle Tom, but.
Right.
It also suggests that Christianity is not offering a way to correct the problem. Christianity is just going to accept it.
Right.
Whereas if you want to change, you got to do something else, I think is the point.
Yeah. And
So
that something
was
else
it-
might be violent, or it might be revolutionary. It could be a lot of the things that.
So was
might
it
be.
Marx who called religion the opiate of the,
Yes.
and when was that? Was that around the same, that was later? But I mean,
I
that
think it was a little later, but
could have influenced the opinion also.
right. I don't think Marx was as influential as Harriet Beecher Stowe, but
Oh,
But-
eventually.
Harriet,
Yeah.
the other point, the thing that made it really moving book for me to have read, besides the development of Uncle Tom as this very, very Christian Christ-like character, is that there were a lot of other characters And that the fact they changed the book title is significant to me. I think A Person is a Thing would have been a much better title, because all these other great characters were things too. And
Right.
so it emphasized, as you say now, the kind of the economics
Right.
of this horrible system.
And the economics perfectly tie to the horror of it, because you have to free the person while you're still alive, or buy the person while you and the person are still alive. And when George goes south, he's too late. And there's nothing he can do about it. And he couldn't have, said from up where he lived that, oh, this is what I want to have happen. You have to be on the scene, and you have to do it right at the moment, or it's no good. So that again it's the transaction. The transaction has to happen at that moment. More.
I'm troubled by her, by the fact that, well, maybe it's sentimentality, that it doesn't lead to an imagined solution that is realistic. In other words, I think the whole thing about going to Canada and Africa is not imagining a country where there could be where Black people could reside at all. In other words,
No.
it's slavery or Africa. It's not imagining a
But,
country.
but Canada is freedom.
Yes, freedom is, yeah.
Yeah,
But-
I mean, it's important that way.
We're not
But
imagining.
what do you think of, Hans, what do you think of the values of the Quakers and the story of the Underground Railroad people?
Those were terrific, but those were, and those also domestic values. The women rule there, right? Yes, Quakers are one.
So she's not
that-
imagining the Civil War. I mean, what else,
No.
what other solution could she imagine? I mean,
Right.
Well, the two possibilities, Liberia, Canada for freedom, or again, it's the dependence on the economics of it that make it so impossible.
well, she
Um,
talks about Liberia in the concluding remarks, the last chapter. And
Yeah.
she says, we can't, and part of it is, I mean, some people just wanted to get rid of the problem and just send them away.
Right. Right.
And she said, that's, how can they go from slavery one minute to governing themselves the next? And she's a big proponent of educating
Yes,
African Americans. So she's saying, you need to train them and then maybe they can go govern themselves. And then maybe as a nation, they'll have more weight in combating slavery as a nation. But yeah, it's not
Right.
a great solution.
The only solution would have been not to do it in the first place, I suppose.
Yeah. But her brother was, well, she had many brothers, but Charles was a preacher in Newark, New Jersey, and he wrote some kind of tract and also actively encouraged his congregation to disobey the Fugitive Slave Act. So
Right, exactly. Well, and that Boston poster does that too. Well, it says, watch out. Because other people are obeying it, and you don't want to be in that situation. So no, she certainly wasn't proposing war, and she doesn't have all of the good possible solutions, but she's stirring it all up. She's waking people up to it and telling them how important this is. I don't know what other things I want to ask you about. I guess one of the, I don't know, stop me if I've already said this, but this is a sentimental novel. And sentimentality for our contemporaries, for, what I learned in graduate school was, sentimental, because it doesn't think. It doesn't approach things rationally. Now, not every novel approaches things rationally either, but insofar as there are solutions, insofar as there are plots, most novels don't go outside of the plot to find the solution. If in Uncle Tom's Cabin, she goes outside and finds it in Christianity or in other laws. Again, Moby Dick doesn't find any kind of solution outside of itself. There's some evil in the world, there are whales in the world, and that's the way things go. So there's a sense in which this, and we call it a domestic novel, and domestic always refers to women. As a domestic novel, the sentimentality equals or maybe surpasses Dickens. Dickens is obviously very sentimental. The death of Little Nell and the death of Little Eva are not all that different. So certainly when I was in graduate school, we didn't think highly of this kind of novel. There were courses in Dickens, but of course Dickens was a man. I just looked at again the literary history of the United States, lists all the important novelists, all the important American writers who are in it, and for 2 centuries worth of writers, the only one who's in there is Emily Dickinson, and the proliferation, the huge number of people, of women who were writing in the 19th century. Now we were trained, I was trained not to think that that was good. I suppose the way we have just done, it's possible to go back to some of that literature and find interest in it, find stuff that we want to read about. So those would be other ways. Hans.
One of the key moments, it seems to me, that illustrates this is, I can't remember, it's been a while. There's a senator who's talking to his wife.
Senator Byrd.
Senator Byrd, yes, he's talking to his wife, and they have an argument in which he explains the fugitive slave law to her, I guess it was, and then says, this is the way it goes. This is the rational solution to the problem, blah, blah, blah. And then she says, you mean if somebody came to the door and needed help, you would not help him? Am I remembering this correctly?
Yeah, I'm just looking for it. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's that different. That's, the immediate sentimental moment. Are you going to help this individual coming to the door or obey this national law? It seems to me that's sort of a key divider. It's also a divider between men and women. And this,
And very much so.
Right. But then Eliza shows up at his door and he takes her in with her child. So
Right. He when they're having that disagreement, he calls her his fair politician. He says, but Mary, just listen to me. Your feelings are all quite right, dear, and interesting, and I love you for them. But then, dear, we mustn't suffer our feelings to run away with our judgment. And
but then he does
that's
just
what
that.
he agrees with. And but when Eliza appears at his door, he says, why did you leave a good home and run away from Kentucky? The woman looked up at Mrs. Byrd, and this is, of course, always Stowe's central question, with a keen, scrutinizing glance, and it did not escape her that she was dressed in deep mourning. Ma'am, she said suddenly, have you ever lost a child? And, that's it. Why do you ask that? Mrs. Byrd said. Then you will feel for me. I have lost 2, one after another, left and buried when I came away, and I had only this one left. And Senator Byrd also gives in. And Stowe says, our senator was a statesman and, of course, could not be expected to cry. But like other mortals, he turned his back. So the point is, and Stowe can be wonderfully sarcastic in that way. I don't know if I call it ironic, but it's certainly sarcasm. And she always will appeal to the reader to come in and make that kind of judgment with her. That's very much what she conceives of her duty as a novelist.
Do you think it's written for women? Its primary audience is women?
I don't know. Yes, no. I don't think she had no idea it was going to be this popular.
Mm.
So yes, it was popular with women, and Dickens was pretty much popular with women too, but it got popular with everybody. So she does a lot of direct addresses, but some of her direct addresses are to men and some are to women. The direct address in a novel is always a way of individualizing that segment of the audience, that reader, you, dear reader. And there are plenty of novelists who do that all the time, not in contemporary novels, I guess, but breaking in theater, it's the fourth wall, right? Coming right out of it. And when Stowe does it, it's always
A lecture.
moral. Yeah, it's always a lecture.
I think there's a lot of irony and satire in it. And I think maybe that's what the sentimental novel does. Dickens does that too. I mean, they're pointing out the hypocrisy.
Uh-huh.
So they may not offer, a world solution, but they're pointing out,
Yeah.
all the flaws in the current system.
Yeah.
And,
As I say, we were
aren't-
taught to think of it that way, but we don't have to. Okay.
What are some of the other traits of a sentimental novel? For example, the exaggeration of the characters. I can see why that critic called it melodrama, but I mean, is that for the purpose of irony, or what is the purpose of such exaggerated characters?
I think the critics in that sense would say, but this is such an innocent and writer that she doesn't really understand how ironic what she's saying is. Well, she was a pretty smart woman. I think she understood it. And so I think that the irony as she presents it certainly is deliberate. That quote that I showed you makes it sound, it's her handiwork, but it makes it sound as if everything she's doing is not possibly something that she's really conscious of. You can't account for the vogue, but she had a ready command of melodrama, and the reception according to her was little short of hysterical. That's a way of insulting her if he possibly can. So yeah, this is as sexist a statement as you could possibly have, I think. We assume, I guess, that it's women who write the sentimental novel a little bit more. Outside of Dickens in the 19th century, there were others, but I'm not thinking of them. And I think they were also very much lesser novelists. We don't think of them as important. But of course, women were reading a lot, and women read this. Louis, unmute yourself. Yeah.
Thank you. I see that I'm probably the one of the survivors of the dwindling audiences. The rest went on to real life. I wanted to thank you because I have never read the book. I never found the topic that particularly compelling. And this has been a most enormously interesting discussion for me.
Oh, thank
I
you.
feel very much the way I felt more than once as a graduate student hiding in the back corner, having gone to a seminar without having read the topic and hoping that I won't be called on, finding that the mere fact that I went and found out something that should have been much more beneficial to me if I'd ever risen to the task. I want to thank you for it, and I'm going to now put much more interest and effort into Uncle Tom's Cabin, and probably
you
some
gonna
other
read it?
things that, yeah, I am. Thank you, and that's been inspired by the
Good.
discussion you've had and the broader parameters of the book that I wouldn't have ever thought of, especially since I didn't give it a chance.
Okay, that's good. Do read it. Yes, definitely. There's a lot more to say, but anybody else want to volunteer anything? Other things that are of interest or maybe side interest? I'm trying to look and see what kind of notes I have.
Harriet, could you speak to her life? Why is there a house in Guilford, Connecticut? That is the Harriet Beecher Stowe house. I kind of have Googled it, so, but can you fill us in?
You mean Hartford?
Or
You
No,
don't-
no,
No,
no.
in Guilford. I can't
Her
do.
mother's family was the Foote family, and they had this house, and who was it? Someone, actually, Mary Jo Warren,
Right.
wrote in the book group that in fact she wrote part of, there is hearsay that she wrote part of Uncle Tom's Cabin at her aunt's house there in Guilford, which she later, I think, inherited. I'm not sure.
Alexa,
Not sure
according
about
to Alexa, she lived there from 1850 to 1852 and wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin there.
Oh, it was you, Cindy. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I just asked Alexa. It may or may not be true.
What does she know?
A lot.
I made a little timetable, and a couple of things that are interesting. 1848 is the Seneca Falls Convention, which is the first women's rights kind of thing. 1870 is the 15th Amendment on voting rights. And that gives voting rights to Black men before white women. So if you're making hierarchies at this point, it's an interesting one.
Isn't that the whole, the feminist movement felt betrayed because the feminist movement put its goals aside to get rid of slavery.
Right, right.
And thought, okay, well, after slavery is gone, we're going to get it next. And it doesn't,
Yeah.
not till, what is it, 1926 or whatever it is.
No way.
Oh, but you
Yeah.
had to be a landowner, is that right?
Yes, a property owner, yeah. Yeah. So there were obviously some people, but think of those kinds of things, and it's 1920 until women get the right to vote. But yeah, I find that really amazing. I'm just looking at other.
Also, I have to
Well,
add,
that's why we had a Black president before we had a woman president. It's still going on.
I want to stress also as a graduate student, roughly at the same time as Harriet, how debased this was as thought of. This was thought of as a sentimental novel, which you shouldn't have to read or teach or do anything.
Right.
In other words, I remember first teaching it, and it was considered revolutionary to teach such a book because it was so thought of. And looking back, it seems obvious to me that it's a female book. It's about mothers and children, and it is full of sentimentality, yes, but the main thing is it's a woman and it's about mothers and children, and men don't value that. It's sort of scary to think back what those times were like.
Yeah.
But it's such a good novel. I mean, I think she's a really good writer.
It has its faults, but it's fun. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. The other thing I wanted to say, Harry, forgive me, was that the slavery part is also, the anti-slavery part hangs a lot on separating mothers from children. That's the worst part of slavery, is that they could be sold away from their mothers.
Yeah.
I also read somewhere, forgive me, that in fact, that didn't happen very often in the South. for the obvious reason that the mother, the enslaved person of whose child would have been sold away, would just go nuts, right? Would just,
Yeah, Stowe says something about that at one point. Somebody says, I don't do that anymore. One of the,
that's right,
skippers, I don't do that anymore because it just makes them useless.
right.
And that's why.
But the point is, it could happen under the law.
It could happen. Yeah.
Sale of a child.
Yes. Yes. He has to go answer the phone. We're in the same
Mm.
house, you understand?
I thought St. Clair was such an interesting character. I mean, he seems very sort of laid back and he goes with the flow, but then when Ophelia finally gets him to say what he really thinks, I mean, he really,
Yeah.
condemns the whole system. And
We haven't talked about Ophelia. Ophelia is the typical Northerner. She thinks that slavery is wrong. She doesn't exactly want to do anything about it, and she doesn't want to touch Black people. That's the big difference. Obviously, the Southerners are in physical contact with Black people all the time. You don't have a mammy without having the mammy hold your white baby. And Miss
and
Ophelia.
they dress you and wash you, and I mean, they do
Yeah,
all kinds of
yeah,
intimate
yeah.
tasks.
But Miss Ophelia doesn't want that to happen personally to her. Now, of course, she takes Topsy and she finally, succeeds in every which way with Topsy. And Topsy's interesting in her own way. She is not related to anything in the world. Who is responsible for your life? I just growed, she says. Nobody has ever taught her anything or taught her about God or not about God or about life in some ways. So Topsy has her road cut out for her, but she's also, well, she's the typical New England spinster. I mean, I can't tell you how many 19th century women's novels were about spinsters and spinsterhood and being rescued from being a spinster or not. I mean, there was a lot. So in that sense, Miss Ophelia is more of a stock character than most of them in the book. Again, because as characters, they haven't been made characters before. Nobody's looked at a St. Clair before or at a Tom before, really, in the way that Stowe is doing. So that's what's interesting and revolutionary about it. Kay,
That conversation between Ophelia and Topsy really struck me because what Topsy told Ava afterwards, that was it Ava that was said, don't you have anyone who loves you?
right,
Not a single person.
right.
And that kind of got to the Christian, not just the Christian love, but the love of between family members and the loving nature of the few good men in the book, like Uncle Tom and St. Clair. So that kind of the whole theme, that idea of love as the relationship underpinning the book really struck me. And probably it's feminine.
Might just be. But yes, and Topsy, of course, is female, and maybe there's some sense in which Stowe sees her as not vulnerable, but at least possibly open to being loved. And there's no equivalent of Topsy as a male, I don't think. The Sambo, the two boys who watch Uncle Tom die, I guess, are possibly recoverable as Christians. But yes, basically,
It's always struck me that one of the tragedies of our culture is that Topsy, who is portrayed as a motherless child who needs a mother, who needs love, is then cut out of that role by popular culture later on to portray a doofus little uneducated Black person. She becomes a caricature of uneducated Black people. It's really a tragedy of how that's converted from the book into part, you showed one of those, Topsy Tobacco.
Yeah, I'm just pulling that up again.
Started
Yeah.
screen share.
It's a
Yes.
joke. I So wicked. You don't see that motherless child in that you
No.
just see wicked little ha ha ha
Well,
Topsy.
plus she becomes educated and becomes a missionary and goes to Africa.
Right. Right. She does. She turns out to be more than good.
But she lives on forever as Topsy.
Right.
I growed, what is it? I can't do it.
I just wrote. Somebody says, well, yeah, what do you
Zuckerman has
attribute your life at this point? And she doesn't know to attribute it to God. And she says, I expect I just growed. And she says, I so wicked, but she doesn't know what wickedness comes. I mean, she's the archetypal uneducated in any sense
unmothered.
child, because she's unmothered, right? It's mothers who do that kind of educating.
But it's Eva who says that she loves Topsy, and then when she dies, yeah, Topsy is
Right.
just beside herself, and that's when Ophelia says, I could love you,
Yeah. Yeah.
which I found very touching.
Yes, it was wonderful. Yeah. Eva basically loves everybody, I guess. She's, well, she
Yeah.
doesn't, I don't know. Is she the equivalent of Tom in White? I don't know. I'm not sure. She loves everybody. She suffers and dies, but she doesn't suffer at the hands of other people, which is what happens to Tom. Yeah. Tom suffers at the hands of sinners, I guess. Well, there is a lot to talk about. We could keep going on, but I think I hope that we've encouraged some people to read it if you haven't. And
And when's this tour?
the tour is now the 21st of June. That's right, Kate. And I don't know whether you'll find out anything much about Uncle Tom's Cabin from taking the tour, but I think it could be interesting, certainly.
Do we have
So-
what are the plans for that day? Do we have any details about the plans? Kate, do you know?
The tour is at 12:30. We have a few people registered. And I thought I'd take the temperature of the room, so to speak. And it would probably be people getting up there early and having lunch and then going on the tour. Yeah, so I'll do research, 2 or 3 restaurants nearby. Actually, I did it when we were doing the Mark Twain house. So I've got 2 or 3 restaurants that'll have sort of something for everybody, at least one something for everybody on it, and then the group can decide.
I'm not even sure that we can come, but I'm hoping that we can. I'm not positive at this point.
Yeah, so the office will arrange carpools, and
The
mm,
date is the 21st,
21st, it's a Friday.
and we should send a check to you.
Yep, when you register, it'll ask you to pay, so you can either pay online when you register with a credit card, or you can send a check in for Home Haven. It's $15. Full disclosure, the Harriet Beecher Stowe house is not fully ADA qualified. The only part is the first floor is ADA accessible. I think that's double A's in there maybe. The second floor and the bathrooms are in the bathrooms are in the basement, and the second floor are only accessible by stairs. There's no elevator. So keep that in mind for your mobility or, durability maybe. But it should be fun, and I think they do have some sort of audio video thing that tours the second floor for people who want to see it. But let me know if you want me to look into that and give you more details, or you can check out their website.
Will there be a docent there who will explain her life? Okay.
Yeah,
it's really a tour in that sense.
yeah, it's a private. There's room for 12, And it'll be a private tour with one of their docents.
Right.
I think it's about an hour.
Could you
Okay.
send us the application thing too? If we want to go?
Go
on-
to the, go to the calendar, the Home Haven calendar.
Oh,
and then
okay.
Click on the event and it'll
Thank you.
lead you. Yep.
Good.
Thank you, Harriet.
Well,
Yeah,
it's fun.
Thank you, Harriet.
Thank you so much.
It was my pleasure.
Thank you. Okay.
Carol
everyone.
Nardini has left the meeting. Louis